Welcome to Breaking Digital Podcast. I'm Doyle Bueller, and today I'm with Rhyss Edwards, who is the founder and editor of a digital publication, Digerati magazine. And in today's episode, we talk a lot about content development, but also how to actually make it work and identify whether or not you kind of have that old story of the emperor's new clothes, rather, where you're chasing a lot of things that may not actually make sense. So Chris and I really get down into what content is, how to actually make it work, what you really need to produce valuable content, how to monetize it. And one of the amazing things here is that it doesn't all have to be digital. So stay tuned. I've got an amazing guest, Rhyss Edwards, coming to us soon.
Overwhelmed with online or just wanting to learn more about how you can build a successful business amidst all of the self-appointed gurus, big buzzwords and empty promises? The Breaking Digital Podcast by Doyle Bueller tells you exactly what smart entrepreneurs need to know to escape the clutter, get clear of the confusion, and pass the bullshit of building and growing a successful business online. It's about digital leadership and delivering the best value for your business online to your audience. Now, here's your host and author of the book on digital leadership and online marketing, The Digital Delusion, Doyle Bueller.
All right, so welcome back to Breaking Digital Podcast. This is Doyle Bueller, and today I'm with an amazing guy who does a lot of traveling around the world, Rhyss Edwards, who is the founder and editor of a digital publication called Digerati magazine. He's been a TEDx speaker as well, and content director for the APAC region for ad tech. You probably have seen those conferences around the world because they are quite popular and that sort of thing. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to kind of finally be able to talk. We've had a bit of an adventure, as I said. Chris does business around the world and trying to connect with him. So I really appreciate your time doing this. Your focus has been content. And we'll obviously explore that a little bit about yourself. Explore that a little bit. But what I thought is, could you give us just a quick rundown of who is Rhyss Edwards and what does he stand for?
What does he stand for is a damn fine question. Well, I'm actually a former soldier who spent the 90s in uniform as a combat engineer and who just lucked into a job at Census and Yellow Pages selling online advertising in the 90s, at the end of the 90s after the tech wreck. And then I've had a career that's always been content focused. I mean, it's always been around digital publishing, whether for brands or agencies or the vendors. And it's been fascinating because I love content. I'm a word nerd. I've just written my second book. And for me, it's always been about the written word and how that's used to shape human experiences. So what I stand for, I guess, these days is bringing honesty back to the marketing and advertising space. And I think that's what content does, because content done well is going to be so much more effective than a banner ad or a data-led campaign that's just working on some basic technology edges. People want to be told stories, and stories is how history has been formed. A person told me his story that helps me shape my knowledge of the world, and I will pass that story on to my son. That's why I think content is fascinating. That's why I stand for content as the first priority most brands should use.
Oh, excellent. You said something quite intriguing, like the honesty of content and that sort of thing. And obviously we've heard a lot about authenticity. Is that kind of the same thing, or do you find it different, or obviously people should be honest, but how do you actually go ahead and sort of prove that point?
Well, I think really good content, and content's been around since 1899 when John Deere created the magazine called Farrow to help farmers farm better and be more productive. And in the middle of all that, they insinuated their products and how to use them. So it was a brilliant marketing vehicle for them. And that was the best proof case of content that I've ever seen, because today they offered value back to the actual farmers to consume their publication. They extolled the virtues of their product in a non-invasive way. And that to me is relevance and honesty. And now we've got to a stage where people are focused on retargeting or doing affiliate deals or looking at data to create insight. And that insight's for getting ads in front of people or videos in front of people. But I think it doesn't actually show respect for the consumer's time, because they tend to be invasive and disruptive. Whereas I think the really compelling content we see out there tells a story, gives me a return for my investment of my time, and helps engender a really good feeling with brands.
And so how do you sort of start that process then of building content that is able to sort of do what you're saying it should be able to do?
I think I tend to think in terms of Venn diagrams. So if you imagine three slightly overlapping circles, the first circle is the brand actually understanding its voice, its promise, the value it offers to its actual target users, and being very clear on the language and the keywords in that. And then the second piece is actually understanding, archetypes of typical consumers or potential customers, the channels they're in, the language that works in those channels, and the words and the needs that are being talked about in that channel. And then the third bit is stitching that all together so that I'm linking my brand goals and my words with my target audience, giving them the right content in the right place, not giving them long-form content on Twitter or other mediums when really a tweet will do or an image should do it. And I think when that all comes together, that's why content's really exciting. But I guess the problem we were talking about before we started recording is that there's a lot of people doing the Emperor's New Clothes approach. They hear that I should be on Snapchat using filters when that might get your name in front of somebody, but is that really relevant, and is that content marketing? I doubt it. You should be focusing on the fundamentals.
Yeah, but what so those are the fundamentals that you're explaining. Where do you find people are missing that though? Because if you look out in the digital space, like you have content that it's just noise. What do you feel, businesses, entrepreneurs, writers, big brands are missing out there that should be done better?
Well, I think they're contributing to the noise is the first thing. So if there's 20 million pieces of content, and that's written content produced every single day on the web, there's 1.3 million pieces of content uploaded to Facebook every, I think, minute. And that's a piece of noise, and some of that is just coming from consumers. And there's 1.2 to 1.5 million blog posts being pushed out every day, and that noise creates disruption and creates fatigue in consumers. So I think it's the brands who slow things down and go back to basics. What is the value I'm going to offer to a consumer? What is the words they need to hear, or what is the imagery they need to hear? And then how does that then shape my content production mix and cycle, and what channels I use? I think that's where you see some brands doing really, really well in one spot, but then doing really poorly in looking after their earned and owned media, which is their blog and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot of steps that they need to go through to sort of get there. Let's pick a big brand, and how could they sort of improve their content side of things?
I'll tell you one brand that is doing amazing work in content, and that's GE, in a B2B audience approach. They have the money for it, and they have this incredible technology story, as does Intel. But what they do is they've surfaced people in their business on platforms like LinkedIn to talk around the key concepts that person is aligned to with the GE brand. So you might be looking at the airline industry and the technology that goes into their engines that are self-diagnosing and fixing on the fly, pardon the pun. And then in another channel, they're servicing these beautiful white papers that are actually part of the pitch cycle. So they're trying to get people's attention on the left with, this is a white paper we've done on an issue that might be relevant to you. You might then go and actually sign up for an email, send me more information. They'll send you a slide deck, or they'll give you very specific targeted information to your need. You'll start to then see display advertising popping up in other places where you're being retargeted with, it might be another white paper, it might be an event that they actually have coming up. I think what they've done is they've got the right content in the right place, and there's no wastage. They're very, very targeted. Their content's beautifully produced. They do everything from really seriously in-depth white papers and case studies through to really well-written from the centre blog posts that talk in the language of a person talking to a person. I think everything that I've seen, and they've won awards all around the world, is because they're very clear about their brand and the thought leadership position they want. They don't even look at the Snapchats and things like that. They just very specifically have their owned media assets. They harness them incredibly well. And so they have a lot of earned media love, and then also media love, because they're just doing a few things really, really well.
Yeah. So it's hard to do jokes when there's a little bit of a delay in the recording. But so once GE goes on to Snapchat, does that mean things are over for them or what?
Well, I would tell you, if they were talking about brand innovation, I'm a big fan of Coca-Cola. They ripped off somebody else's media investment methodology quite a few years ago, and they had this 70-20-10 model of where they decide to invest their money in media each year. And 70% goes into the stuff that's tried and true. So that's outdoor and TV and radio and print. And the 20% goes into the stuff that's kind of on the fringe. So a while back, that was content marketing, and not that long ago, that was mobile too. So they put 20% of their money there. And then they put 10% of their money into the new thing. They get really excited. So what can we do in the face of IoT or AI or machine learning or Snapchat or whatever, just to get some attention, just to see what we could learn from it. So I wouldn't write off GE for actually playing with Snapchat or using Snap Inc.'s new glasses or things like that if they actually had a really interesting story or there was something they were trying to learn that would shape the way you and I or other brands might look at that channel.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the flavor of the month club too, is that we kind of get caught up with, as you call it, the emperor's new clothes type thing. But if you're being strategic, if you're planning ahead, you're building your content based on, your principles that you've developed there with the archetypes rather, and the values and that sort of thing. It doesn't really matter what platform comes up next or what, might come down or what fails for lack of a better word too, because some obviously have done that. Do you find that you can sort of create this, sense of strategic content as opposed to just sort of positional content, if there's an actual word for that?
I think there's three layers of content that any brand should be looking at, and that's the evergreen stuff, which tends to be, it just absolutely talks to one of the brand fundamentals or one of the key messages or changes they're hoping to make in market or solutions for consumers. Then you've got on the other end the really kind of light content that you flick out, which is a quick tweet or something like that, or we've just heard something in the news, we're going to newsjack with an infographic that we've created with a hashtag and push that out. And then there's a middle ground, which can involve everything from working with influencers and advocates who are being briefed by a content team or a content agency to talk to the fundamental brand values and do a little bit more work. And it might be a video blog, for example, that they then push out and then the brand gets to pick up on and amplify. But it's very different for different brands as to what content works for them. For us, with Digerati, we know that Twitter doesn't work. It doesn't work in the sense of driving brand value. We have 13,000 followers, which we've done nothing to actually build. But we'll post stories up there, but we don't expect that to drive a lot of engagement with our brand. Our email list works best for us, and search is starting to become our good friend. And we also tap into advocates. So when somebody writes a story for us, we'll share that on LinkedIn. They share it then with their network, and the link love goes on and on. But I think it's interesting for each brand to be very, very clear around what content they think works for them. And then 1, 2, and 3 channels that they want to focus on really, really tightly, make that to 70 and 20%, and then put most of their effort into that for the first year or so, and absolutely learn, absolutely track, absolutely look at kind of how that's shared and get some analysis back in to feed the next generation of content, and only spend 10% of your time on the snaps or whatever might be of interest to you.
Mm-hmm. Just as a testing and proving ground. One of the things that obviously sort of flows from your equation is that of archetypes, right? I find that there's a lot of noise produced because, they're not able to, the businesses, the brands, they're not able to actually focus on sort of their ideal audience. Can you take us on a journey of how do you actually develop an archetype? Why should brands be doing this?
Well, I think why they should do it is because the metrics just actually prove that it works. So if we look at the old marketing program of AIDA, attention, interest, desire, and action, that along the consumer purchasing cycle, content will be used in different ways. So let's go back to GE, for example. Their way of getting attention, or Intel is another great example, is to just do these massive stunts. So here in Sydney, Vivid Festival that was on earlier in the year, Intel had 100 synchronized drones flying along to music and capturing the event. It was just beautiful, and it was so incredibly well done that it made news headlines. They got some great content out of it. And that's a great way for capturing attention and seeing that Intel is doing the really cool stuff. Underpinning that, so they've got everyone's attention, great. So you might go and check them out on their website and find they've got access to other content. They've got video case studies of some of the stuff they do. And then you're saying, okay, well, Intel's interesting, and I'm seeing how they're using Intel technology to power creative hubs. That's of interest to me. So I dig in and I get a case study or a white paper. And so I'm now at the interest stage. And so I've downloaded that, and then I see that it's talking around fundamentals of how I should be deciding on using an Intel product or integrating it into my business. I'm now at desire stage, so I'm now getting in contact with somebody, and they're sending out more information all the way through to the action stage. So I think brands need to be really clear about their archetypes being, at one end, we just had a complete stranger who wasn't even looking for an Intel product or didn't want to fundamentally, consciously change their business, suddenly become interested and informed enough to take action and be taken on a journey because different content at different stages, different levels of awareness, different depth of knowledge. I think every brand has to do that. There's a consumer out there that they hope to catch. There's a consumer out there that already knows a bit about them. There's a consumer who's actually in the middle of actively looking for that type of technology or product. There's somebody who has questions around a particular need, around a technology or product. And there's someone who's just seconds away from actually buying and looking at your competitor, and you need to give them that final reason, which might be price or service or partnership, whatever that might be. So I think the value of having different content at different stages and not adopting a one-size-fits-all approach is you push people down a funnel and turn them into a customer. And, that's the success of content.
Yeah, no, for sure that makes sense. But you don't necessarily need to be everywhere per se. A recent example was, I think it was Rolex that just sort of opened up an Instagram account. And I don't know the history of have they been on a lot of social media accounts previously. Maybe you do. But their silence was deafening, as they say. And they were sort of able to capture a lot of interest because they hadn't been delivering their content. So I'm kind of wondering from the other side is the fact that maybe you can just, let your brand speak for itself. Do you actually still need to produce content?
I think the way that we view content is different. I would argue there's 116 different content types. So at just a single image of a beautiful Rolex on the arm of a celebrity or just on a table beautifully shot is a piece of content that's talking about your brand. Anything that comes to life and comes out of the brand center that ends up in market is content, ostensibly. We just have to look at this in very different ways. So Rolex might not blow out these huge numbers unless there's some great big influencer strategy or something going on. But you look at Australian fitness guru Kayla Itsines, 6.4 million followers on Instagram because she's putting up success stories and photos of women getting their beach body on, before and after photos. She's putting up quotes about her business and how she's changing the world. She's mentioning the celebrities and the people she's meeting as she's traveling the world, getting people fit. She's doing a perfect form solution for that channel. Not lots of big blog posts. She has a brilliant app that I think it's trained with Taylor. I think it's Kayla. And it's massive following because it's changing people's lives. She's using the language of get beach body fit. She's using great success case studies. But there's no big blog post. You go into the app and you pay an X amount of money per month. You get a really positive message, you get your exercise to do that day, and you get out again. And then you might cruise during your lunch break across Facebook and Instagram, get a little bit more encouragement to do more exercise because you're watching these women who were once like you, or are still just like you, getting fitter and fitter. So I think that's, don't need a big blog post, don't need a big YouTube channel, don't need to be writing guidebooks and things like that. You're just focusing on 2 or 3 channels and doing it really well.
Yeah, and I guess that sort of leads to the question of, that's great. How do a lot of businesses monetize that content side of things? Do they use it as sort of a means to an end with their content, or do they actually, sell their content as well?
I think there's nothing wrong with selling your content. I mean, if you look at the traditional, say, mid-sized business cycle, where the goal is to build up an email list, that you need to have a lead generation tool of some form. So somebody finds out about you from display or for content or whatever, and then they come to your website and you say, like we do on Digerati, we've got as soon as you come to our site for the first time, as you're leaving the site, a pop-up comes up and says, would you like to join our email list? Just type in your email and we'll give you a spreadsheet with 300 tools every digital marketer needs. And that for us works for our community because we get the email address, and that to us is the ROI factor. Mm-hmm. And so we can see from the amount of traffic we get each month, how many people sign up for the email, how many are new, how many are old. And that's one metric that we know leads to an ROI outcome because, we've got a bigger audience and we're growing our footprint. I think it's interesting that the metrics that we look for ROI on content are as simple as, you look at everything from traffic that's generated, downloads of something, email list build, shares, likes, engagement, comments, people actually doing inquiry very specifically for an outcome like, I have a certain type of business, this number of staff, what type of technology should I use from your suite? Hit enter. It's a very informed inquiry, that you can actually map the number of those inquiries from the total number of people who hit your website and get a very nice ROI number on sales spikes at the end of a month. And then I think it's also very interesting when you look at the big area that's only really starting to explode is content discovery, because that's using tools like Taboola and Outbrain to pay to have your content surfaced in context on other publisher sites. Those clicks, and same as with Facebook, you can track that explicitly, drop a pixel on the page and off you go, and you can very explicitly say from that campaign, using that very specific headline and that image, I generated X number of leads. So it's simple as any other channel in the sense that there are metrics that matter. How you value a download versus an email address versus the actual sales at the end of a given quarter is up to each brand, but it's absolutely trackable, which is the best part.
Yeah, no, for sure. With sort of the content discovery, though, I found that, my personal experience is that a lot of that doesn't necessarily sort of flow with the overall content that you would expect. So it's honestly, some of it seems like it's pretty trashy when you think about it, because you're reading, New York Times or whatever, and sort of the follow-on content is I don't think they've thought about it, but it's not related at all. It's like, I don't know, just content that's really bad. I have no interest in it whatsoever. Do you think that that's going to be able to improve as sort of the triggers of who I am become known to these types of publishers?
I think it's improving pretty quickly. You have to imagine it's only the past 3 or so years this has really taken off. So what's actually occurring with the likes of, I know Taboola specifically, they actually have 2 layers of authentication of content relevance. So what that's actually doing, so what you're paying for is your ad to appear around certain algorithmically determined and human qualified content types and topics. Yes, you see a lot of trash, and I absolutely agree with you. I've seen some publishers who just don't care. They just want the money from the click. Then you see other environments, like the more senior business sites that are using the same thing, but they're actually only surfacing financial type topics. And they're not money scams, it's actually money stories, because it's the smaller brands who want to be associated with a big finance brand to actually start getting that kind of brand leverage. I don't think it's all the way there yet by any means, but I think it's definitely improved over what I've seen in the past year or two.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. With digital publishing, that kind of brings up like part of this too is, do you see, like, for example, New York Times, with Digerati, I'd like to sort of get your thoughts and your insights on sort of these models, but of content production. So for example, the New York Times, you can only view it like, I think it's maybe you can view 10 articles a month kind of thing, and then they want to charge you. And newspapers have really struggled with that traditional media. How do they actually convert it into digital and monetize it? And I know you briefly talked about email lists and that sort of thing, but is there a paying model of content that you might see coming, or one that exists quite nicely today that will kind of disrupt things or in terms of content delivery?
I think it's I think we're actually we're finally a market globally where we love paying for content, whether it's iTunes or Netflix or it's a publisher site. There are people who will pay for types of content depending on their need. So I think what we're talking about here is a hybrid model. Probably, if you look at it, 90% of your audience just wants to read whatever content they can for free. You'll have 9% that kind of sway, and then there'll be the 1%, or might be as high as 5%, that if you get your content mix right, like the Wall Street Journal and those guys, where there's larger write-ups on certain topics, you're getting ancillary information or richer information like video, or you're getting white paper access for your payment, and having a very gated amount of value that you've determined from data and from really knowing your market. That's the model that works. I mean, you'll make advertising dollars off the 90% because you'll have display ads being sold. You'll have data you learn from them that you can then use in DMPs. And then you'll also have the content discovery plugins at the bottom of the page. And yes, CPMs are dropping, but overall there's other ways of monetizing as display starts to die, like the content discovery engines and data feeds. And then you've got this, you might make a better yield per customer off the people who are paying for this content that's actually really exclusive, but it's coming at the cost of that content being more expensive to do. And I think it's still in flux. I don't think we'll see every brand move into a gated community project. I started looking at it at News Corp in 2010 in Australia, and I think they launched the next year with the Australian, and that was quite a successful project in getting people to actually pay because they locked down some really, really good content. But by example, with Digerati, we started with just being on the app. You had to go to the App Store or Google Play to get our app, to get our content, and within 3 to 4 months we pivoted because we recognized our product proposition is that we have a 360-degree view of digital on our website, and we're the only one who does that. So we aim for marketers in the middle. We don't talk to CMOs. We don't talk to startups. But we had to realize these people are seeing a lot of this content in disparate sources. Why would they pay to use the app to get access to that? Because it's actually disruptive. They should be able to get an email that gives them access to the content, and we build trust over time, showing them this breadth of marketing that's actually as available to them as any other competitor out there. But our content's just broader and speaks in their language. And we worked out our product proposition because we realized we'd put one step between us and the consumer that wasn't necessary and wasn't going to be profitable in the long run. So we pivoted. Ultimately, we will roll out exclusive content, but not in the short term, because we do get access to really interesting people that we have really good, rich content with. We sat down with the Chief Digital Officer of New York City and interviewed him for an hour. And that interview is fantastic, and do we want to monetize that? Potentially, but right now, no. I mean, we're just really focused on doing what works and playing with some stuff, but not doing too much different.
Yeah. So the way you see it is sort of providing that extra value in terms of content sort of behind a paywall or that sort of thing. So some companies you're saying can pull it off or rather want to, and others just decide that that's not for them. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think it's interesting because I've been around the publisher sector for about 10 years, and declining revenues, lots of instant competition. Everyone now can have like a mid-sized news site, and it does cost a lot of money to put in gated communities and control that and to create great content unless you have really solid partnerships and you can bundle content together and share a clip of the ticket. I think every brand, which is interesting today, has become a publisher. I think you look at brands like Red Bull, who are just like a media company now, rather than just like this drink and t-shirt and sports brand. They're nailing it because they're getting people to send in rich content. They're plugging into UGC. They're creating really awesome content that they're letting people rebadge. And they're making money out of it because, they're getting more products sold and more people attending their events. So that works for them. But that's not going to work for a News Corp or a Fairfax or some of those guys, because really they have a core competency around creating content, and in a lot of cases the amount of effort that goes into getting money from exclusive content isn't actually worth the investment right here and now because they're so worried about protecting revenues for the mainstream.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Do you see things going maybe the other way though? Like, for example, I still love magazines. They're good. They feel good. You can kind of put them down and pick them up. Do you feel that, I don't know, would Digerati ever sort of publish a traditional print magazine? And why don't we see more of those kinds of things? Or is it past that and we can never sort of see that type of thing again?
I think it's people who talk about the death of the magazine or the death of books, I think, are taking a really dim view of the world. I mean, we're now selling more books by volume than ever before, both in print and digital, because digital is about convenience. But there's many, many people out there who will never use an Uber ride because they still love taxis. They'll still book through hotels out of trust rather than using Airbnb. They'll still buy books because they want that tactile experience. My wife likes getting a newspaper on a Sunday and sitting back and pulling the paper apart and going through that. I think it's interesting that we see disruptions all occurring, but there's still always fundamentally going to be a group of people who like doing what they've always done. For Digerati, we design up our magazine, and it is beautifully designed using a magazine template and published to app and also to issue. And we've talked about it. We can hit a button and actually print out 1,000 copies and send them out to people. We don't want to do that yet, but it's there ready to go if we wanted to. So I don't think anything's out. It's one of those 10% projects for us. If we saw real value in doing that and getting it into print newsstands, and I've done this before, and it's hard work, and the return I think is quite small, and the return in the sense of market growth and branding I think is quite small as well too. So do we really want to be a digital original brand that crosses over into the print world? Does that talk to our product proposition and what we're trying to do, or is it actually just a nice innovative stunt? So I think the big priority for brands when they're looking at content is if brands started thinking of themselves as publishers or aggregators of content, which is tapping into UGC. If they start looking at, we create content already for our blog, or we create white papers, or we create Q&As or checklists, or we have a forum, or we have a big tribe community of people creating content on our behalf that we aggregate around our brand on social or within our branded environments, I think that's where the opportunity lays, is taking a big holistic view and seeing themselves as publishers, thinking in terms of publishers, so investing in the right amount of effort, not in playing in stuff that doesn't actually generate a return, and then looking at how they can do things differently in that space.
Yeah. So kind of combining the different aspects and using it as you need it, right? Which I love. That's sort of the print on demand model too. But doesn't necessarily mean that you have to kind of go all out and say, yeah, we're going to be a print publication. But that kind of leads me to my next question. But how do you actually get found? So let's say you're creating brilliant content. You've aligned your archetypes. You've got some great value. You might have a paywall. You might not. It doesn't really matter. How do you kind of get the message out there?
Well, I think you start with your owned assets. So whatever social channels you have, whatever email you have, whatever traffic to your blog you have, whatever relationships you have in market with partners, for example, I think you have to start there because these are already people that know you and love you, and they're a great way to get started. And then I think it's about, for us, we partner with the IAB and key industry bodies around the world to actually surface their content as well. So I think looking out the first ring is all about owned. The second one's really around earned. People talking in the same section, content areas as you, and then reaching out to them and doing cooperative relationships. So going out to their audiences. Then I think there's also this big debate, and I absolutely agree that you should do it, because I don't think there's anything these days. It's not bad to talk around paid virality, because you look at a lot of these brand videos that have gone absolutely viral, but a lot of them have a lot of money behind them to get them to critical mass. So I think paid virality, content discovery, so that's everything from what you might do to surface your video on YouTube, get that up on Facebook and pushed out to people with really good targeting and lookalike audiences, what you do with the taboolas and the outbrains to get it seen. I think that has to be considered as well too, because it's a nudge at the start of a campaign that can really make a massive difference, because people see a number under a piece of content and they go, well, it's only been shared 7 times, not so interested. But when they see that a piece of content with, they don't know it, money behind it has been shared 10,000 times, it suddenly starts to get on their radar. So I think working in those 3 concentric circles is really important. Yeah.
And it's not considered cheating either, is it?
No, because not unless the piece of content is actually really relevant for the market that you're targeting. But if you're putting a Dove Real Beauty campaign in front of me, you're wasting your time, and I don't really love the idea of you doing that. But if my friend sends that to me, so if that Dove campaign was sponsored and bumped up in my Facebook feed, I wouldn't like it. But if one of my female friends said, look at this as a beautiful example of a content campaign that really touches on women, I'd actually look at that. So it's it's very interesting, and it has to be respectful, but there's no problem with actually paying at the start of a campaign to get it off the ground, as long as the campaign has a really specific use case and target audience, and you're going after the right people.
Yeah, so making sure that it's targeted and focused on your specific archetype.
Yeah, and the specific channel that's being distributed on.
Yeah, true. Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh no, that's all excellent. I know you've got a busy schedule, Chris. Quickly, you also deal a lot with the ad tech, sort of the trade show side of things. What are those, and how do they help the industry?
2013, I jumped on board the team that runs ad tech in Australia and New Zealand, and helped reshape that, because they kind of died off a bit in industry. AdTech, I think, is great because it's the longest running global digital event. And we've recently reshaped it to focus on marketing because all marketers are digital marketers. So let's look at marketing goals. So we had people coming into the event in previous years who had a specific marketing need, and they could go and now sit in a stream of content that actually helps them find more customers, how to convert better, how to tap into using data or new technologies. I think that's really interesting. They shape the industry. I'm currently helping program Adobe Symposium in Sydney, and I'm sitting in their office right now. And they have a really interesting need around helping people understand their products because they are the market leader, but also helping people actually see answers to their questions because they survey and they say, what do you want to see on stage? What are your 4 kind of key priorities or knowledge bundles? Do you want to talk about data? Do you want to talk about automation? Do you want to talk about creativity? And then we're shaping an event around that. And I think anything that actually helps move the needle, if I'm a person coming to an event, the investment of my time, and this is content marketing because an event is content marketing on steroids. If I come to your event and I walk away knowing 3 new things, having answered 3 questions, having met 3 peers, and having maybe 3 vendors or potential partners to reach out to in the future to help my business grow, that's a successful event.
Yeah, and that's actually key is that I actually love the contrast here because there's the digital side of it, but yet there's all that traction. Events are content marketing on steroids, right? So you actually, and I think a lot of businesses miss this, is that they just are 100% digital, which, perhaps for your audience that might be the case. And don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing that, but for a lot of businesses, a lot of brands, it's like, okay, well, we still have to build that engagement, like Red Bull, right? Like, yeah, they're digital, but they also have, these events that kind of really pull people together. And I would totally agree. Like events are where it's at.
It's one of the fastest growing categories globally for in the live media sector. I was in New York for AdTech year before last, and I sat down with one of the CMOs at Pfizer, and she said, if your event isn't between my office and my train station, which is 5 blocks away, I won't go to it because she gets invites every single day to these big thought leadership events and lunches. And it's that busy that, she has to be that cruel in her decisions,
Wow. but it's something to sort of add to your toolbox that, look, you kind of got to get your content out there sort of in both spaces as well. Excellent. A fascinating discussion, Chris. I'd love to spend some more time with you, but I know you're off to the airport. How do we find you? Where can we locate you?
People can just go on Google and type in Digirati magazine or digiratimag.com. And it's always open. We love people coming to the website and asking us questions through that. So more than welcome.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, cool. And all the links, we'll put some up to Digirati and the AdTech conferences as well, coming up around the world for a lot of marketers and strategic digital marketing as well. So fascinating discussion, Chris. I really appreciate your time. So that's basically where we're at. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you online. Thank you very much for listening to Breaking Digital, the podcast for smart entrepreneurs wanting to become true digital leaders in their industry and to own online. If you have any comments on the program, please feel free to connect on Twitter at Doyle Bueller with the hashtag #OwnOnline. I would really appreciate it if you could share this podcast with your network, as I'm sure they will get some value from it for building their successful business online as well. You can find the resources that we talked about, as well as the transcript and full podcast for download on thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast or on iTunes or on SoundCloud. I'm Doyle Bueller, and I will see you online.
Thank you for listening to Breaking Digital with Doyle Bueller. While he goes and makes a sandwich, you can find all of the notes, links, and details on this podcast by visiting thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast. Go on and click that now. www.thedigitaldelusion.com/podcast. I'll definitely click that. If you'd like a free copy of the book, The Digital Delusion, How to Overcome the Misguidance and Misinformation Online, just send an email to doyle@thedigitaldelusion.com. See you online.